sort of offset all the Bob Owen real estate signs all over town. The other interesting thing that happened in that election then was a week or two, pretty close to the election, I got a call from a Democratic friend of mine who lived near on the southwest corner of 95th and Mission Road. And he lived next door to Lou Rasmussen. Lou, a good Republican, still around, active in Leawood, was on the city council and planning commission there. Anyway, he had been talking to Lou, who was president of that Homes Association and ward captain for the 5th Ward, which ward captain for Republican ward captain was a pretty important position in those days. But he wasn't happy with the Republican candidate and wanted to talk to me. And so I met with him. Well, we ended up meeting several times. The last time, he had all of his Republican committee people there about a week before the election, and they voted to endorse me for mayor. Now, this was the most Republican of the Republican areas of the city, and Lou, a very conservative individual then and still is. And they did this just a few days before the election and then got flyers out election day. I ended up carrying the 5th Ward. Actually, the first time I ran, I won fairly easily, carrying all 5 of what was in the 5 wards of the city. And after the election then, there were 2 Democrats elected to the 10-member council. Bob Warley, who had been on the council before and was re-elected from the 3rd Ward, middle of the city here, middle then, and Ben Sykes from the 5th Ward, which was in All Hills area. So, and there were 8 Republicans. Don Sloan was the Republican city chairman, and Don still thought he could run the city. He would call meetings, caucuses of the Republican council members, off the record, or secretive meetings anyway, we can go to, and to decide how they would vote on issues coming before the city, such as opposing obtaining federal funding or grants for the first parks in the city, and appointments. They decided they would not confirm any of my appointments to the city council, and I tried appointing some good Democratic councilmen to the planning commission or some of the boards, and they wouldn't do it. The Board of Zoning Appeals was made up of all Republican ward captains. All of them, by the time I left office, they turned down my appointments, rejected them, and so all of them were holdover appointments because no one had been appointed to fill that take their place. One of those I attempted to appoint to office, I believe it was the Planning Commission, was Matt Ross, who was the Civic Center, but he couldn't get confirmed by the City Council. Dick Erickson, who was an attorney practicing in Missouri, his wife was George Erickson, Republican City Chairman, or Republican County Vice Chairman, and also a longtime Overland Park Councilwoman, and they refused to confirm Dick. I saw George Erickson back a few years ago, and she said, yeah, and he said, Dick never did forgive him. Well, I got a lot of Republican friends that way in any event. After that election, I met with Bob and Ben several times. Let me check while I'm trying to move this along. We met and discussed what was coming up, and we didn't have open meeting laws then, or public record acts. There was one secret meeting before I was mayor that was held when the city hall was on the 2nd floor of the building. North of us on 80th Street here. Was it the Floyd building or the Fleming building? Fleming building, wasn't it? Yeah. And there was a little restaurant downstairs. The restaurant caught on fire one night, and the fire department reported along with the news media, and they interrupted a meeting going on upstairs, and the council members came streaming out, so the secret meeting was over. But Ben and Bob and I discussed it, and I had discussed with them the most important thing coming to the city was this election of the city manager. In my view, and I campaigned on the need for professional government. The city manager plan had been adopted in the same election at which I was elected. And so, and we discussed what we could do on that in order that it not be cut out and another selection by the Republican committee in effect. And got a big break on it, and one of the councilmen was Harry Burkhart from the 5th Ward, architect, who came to me one day, and many of them, most of them were good people. Don Sloan was a very competent individual, I want to stress, and capable guy. He was on the other side. He was kind of heavy-handed, which made it easier to run against him on things. He went on to be president, I believe, of Pete Mark International, the accounting firm. His daughter Kathleen is a judge, and he was very competent, but he liked to manage and things and kind of heavy-handed. I always said I probably could not gotten elected, except I re-elected, except it was easier to run against him than my opponent. But anyway, so Harry Burkhart came to me, and he was friendly with many of us, to tell me that he'd been very disappointed to learn he was going to be transferred to Indianapolis. And he had been very involved in the city manager plan and the adoption and working for that, wanted to stay involved as long as he could, and wanted me therefore to keep it, if I could, keep it confidential, and that he would stay as long as he could, but he would have to start missing meetings and eventually resign. So I plotted with Bob Warley and Ben Sykes, the only two Democrats, and said the first thing I'd do, I'd appoint a committee with a senior council member from each of the 5 wards, and with the Republican chairman, Dean Robertson. Fine. Most of these were fine individuals, say that we had different on the political matters, but Dean and that the Republicans would go along with this because I gave them 4 Republicans and 2 Democrats on the committee. And then knowing that when Harry started having to miss meetings, he had told me that he would then ask, and did ask, to be relieved of his committee assignment because he was missing so many meetings, and that left the senior councilman from the ward, newly elected, Ben Sykes, another Democrat. So we ended up with 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans on the 6-member committee. We all agreed on the need for a very professional approach to the selection of the city manager. And we narrowed it down through a process of to 3 candidates. I remember talking to one of them being Don Pipes. I remember talking to Dr. Steen, the dean of the KU Management School, and we talked about all these candidates, and the Pipes, he said, well, he would be a very good, he's ready to move up, but he says he has a problem, and he's from Wayzata, Minnesota, which is a town of about 3,000, and it's too small a town, so the big cities overlook him, but his salary's so high, the smaller cities are overlooked him. But Don was from St. Joseph, Missouri, and he stopped by, just happened to stop by as he was going to visit parents one day to introduce himself. We narrowed it down to Don, Bob Kipp of Vandalia, Ohio. Bob Kipp went on to be an assistant city manager, I believe, in Kansas City, Missouri, maybe city manager for a while, director of the Hallmark Foundation, very competent, great individual. His dad was a professor, a faculty member at KU, and Don was great. My wife and I visited him in Vandalia and really liked him as, maybe because our kids were about that tall and they all showed up in the same Buster Brown outfits. George Majoris was the other. George was a township manager of an urban township in Pennsylvania. So we had two council members, one Democrat, one Republican, or committee members, went back, visited with each of the three, and then we met. And Bob and Ben and I discussed it and knew that, were sure that everybody was going to support the candidate they had visited. So we had a committee meeting to discuss it, and I had plotted with Ben, I hate to use the word plotted, I told Ben and Bob at least in advance that after a discussion of it, I suggest, well, we're not getting any place, let's all write down our first choice on a slip of paper and hand it in. And we did that, and Ben, Bob, and I had agreed we were going to vote for Pipes. And the vote came in, and it was 4 votes for Don Pipes, 1 for George Majoris, and 1 for Bob Gibb on the committee. And so Don Sloan and the committee, his group, kind of figured out what had happened to him then. But Dean Robertson was chairman of the committee, and Dean said, well, he was going to stick to what the committee had recommended. And so we went out, and well, then we had a closed meeting of the city council itself. And at that closed meeting, the first vote was 5-5, and I cast the decisive vote then for Don Pipe. Then we went out and announced the unanimous selection of Don Pipes as city manager. And that was, as I say, in the summer of 1963. The first meeting that Don attended turned out to be a pretty big deal. It was in August of 1963. And at that meeting, Harry Burkhart had moved by that time and resigned from the city council. And the Republican committee had, although we didn't know about it at that time, had endorsed Don Elliott, a insurance salesman from the 5th Ward. Don had ran for election in the primary, along with a couple of others, but he came in third in the primary. But he immediately had already announced that he was going to run against me the next time, for the next election. And so they came in and attempted to appoint him as the new council member to fill the vacancy. I told him, he name hadn't been mentioned, we had no discussion about it, and that they could name and I expect they would name a Republican, but they should do me the courtesy of discussing with me, telling me what was going on, and we argued about that for a while, and they went ahead with the vote and the second vote. I said, well, I'm going to veto that, but I've got 2 weeks to do it. Then the argument was, well, you can't veto it, and I said, well, I have, or will. And then everybody started yelling. So then I declared the meeting out of order and adjourned, and they said I couldn't do that, and I said I have. Now, the way you learn who wins those big political arguments, Bernice Heck, then, later Bernice Crummett, was the city clerk. And when I announced the meeting was adjourned, she folded up her big books and walked out. Everybody saw that and said, well, I guess the meeting's over. So these administrative and implementation deals are very, very important. That was the first meeting Don Pipes had attended. He did return. Throughout, where annexation was always an issue in Overland Park in those early years. We had succeeded in annexing the area west of Antioch, excepting for the Oak Park area, I think 400 or 500 acres, where the Oak Park Mall is, but also the surrounding subdivision. Those were owned by the J.C. Nichols Company, and it was owned by the J.C. Nichols Company, and they'd had a problem, an argument with the Old Mission Urban Township Board. Ansel Mitchell was the director of real estate development for the Nichols Company Corporation, and probably had more to do with much of the early development of Johnson County than any other one person. and they had, he liked the streets all leading toward the plaza. I-35 is diagonal, Johnson Drive is diagonal, what was the next one? Tomahawk was a diagonal street. Somerset, all of them were diagonal streets, but they ended at what became the Overland Park city limit of Lamar. And so he had never had good feelings toward Overland Park. I know because I talked to him about it, and he told me about these grievances he had, and he had sort of halfway committed to Harry Maurer, the old Lenexa mayor, and Shawnee Township chairman, that area would be in Lenexa. So that went along then, but we'd annexed most of the other area prior to that time. And let me flip over here so I can get the dates for you exact.
I brought you some water. Would you like to take a drink?
Yeah, I'll probably use that. I don't know where I have to put it, but
I'll hold it.
Says here on the table.
I'm planning on it, yes.
This could be interesting.
Before you forget, tell us about this picture.
okay. All right, I'll,
That was all Marion.
let me digress a little bit. I'll come back to the picture.
Yeah, I'm familiar with what happened. And I always wanted to see where.
See a big difference between Mary and Lamar.
I had moved, early on, I had moved from Bob Owen's office to the building where the John Francis restaurant is, upstairs above the restaurant, which was the nicest and only decent office building, only newish office building in Overland Park. And practiced with a number of attorneys there. One of them was Linda Henry. Linda's had a certain style. I know, for instance, that I had always said, would identify by telling people I was upstairs above the John Francis restaurant. I know Linda's would identify as, well, I'm across the street from the Overland Park State Bank. There was a recent, Brad had a blog recently with a photograph, and one of those responding to the photograph was a woman who I don't remember her name, was like Rebecca something. Anyway, that was Cricket, Linda's daughter, who answered the phone. She commented about having to answer the phone as, let's see, it was Henry, Shackle, Gilman, Falkenberg, and Rainey, which was, she worked there as a summer during high school 2 years. Now Cricket went on to law school and to be on the faculty at the Washburn Law School. I have to think, well, it could be KU. I think it was the Washburn Law School. Her husband was an attorney and was a general counsel of the League of Municipalities at one time. But anyway, her dad was Linda's Henry. And this picture originated with Linda's, or this painting. And when he left then, he passed it on to me. And Linda's did things, I say, with a certain degree of style. He commissioned this painting by a local artist by the name of Bone, who I had seen other work by him. He had a lot of wheat fields and barns and things like that, typical Kansas picture. And Linda's had given him photographs from the Breyfogle family that showed these various buildings. And Linda's commissioned him to do the painting, and we had an unveiling one day. And we had all the city dignitaries of the Breyfogle family and sat there. And we unveiled this, and all of us kind of looked at it because it really did look like Overland Park. Those buildings do. The yellow brick building is the bank on the southeast corner of Valley View and 80th Street here. And it looked about like that when I was there, except it didn't have the horse watering trough out front. But when I first had a count there, it looked about like that. Florence, you may remember that. I've seen a lot of pictures of all of these buildings. The other building on the stone building, small stone building, is the old Strangline Station on the south east corner of 80th and Santa Fe. And it's been a restaurant and a lot of different things over the years and added to. If you look at the building now closely, you will see in photographs that the building, if you look at it, that it has a stone foundation or 3 or 4 feet, and then the frame building above that. And if you look at that original building now, you can still see that the lower part of that building has that wide foundation where they simply covered up the old stone, and I assume the stone is still there. The white building that looks, I'm not quite sure what it looks like, that was on the southeast corner of Santa Fe and Robinson, where there was the Overland Park Elementary School at one time, or early grade school at that location. The building I've heard described in various ways as the first moving picture studio west of the Mississippi, and the first aviation hangar west of the University of, or west of the river. I had a book at one time, don't know where it is, Early Aviation History, Kansas City, that had a lot of photographs of it with airplanes parked around it and in the area and the airstrip that was adjacent to it. And it was apparently the first, at least in this vicinity. The Strangs, whom Florida can tell you more about than I can, did a lot of promotion to sell these land and lots out here. And one of them was to have air shows and exhibitions. Another one was to do things like have 2 railroad engines collide out here. And that brought the people out, sold them lots, including the area where I was and then lived, or my family lived, the old Elmhurst area, where you had 25-foot lots, and you could buy 2 or 3 or 4 as many as you wanted. There were other subdivisions around there that he developed also. That building then later, I understand, although I didn't know it at that time, housed the Jennings family feed mill, and later we later knew it as a garden store, most of us. And then it burned, and then they moved to the location on 80th Street was the way reports. Well, their first building, when I first knew it was, the store was on the southwest corner of 80th and Foster, thank you, yeah. 80th and Foster, where the law offices are now. But it didn't look much like that, but the buildings are authentic and did look like that. I've seen those same photographs of those same buildings. The Dreifogel family owned the land on the east side of Santa Fe, which was vacant then, and which is where the right-of-way for the old Strang line was, and later built and developed in that area. John Dreifogel Sr. was a strong individual and developer. I met with him. He wanted to meet with me when I was running for re-election, and he told me that, he said, well, he had the reputation of being strictly a staunch Republican, voting straight party line ticket, but he wanted to know that wasn't always true. There was one time he didn't vote the straight Republican ticket. That was when he voted for Teddy Roosevelt on the Blue Moose. Blue Moose, not Blue Moose.
Bull
Moose.
Moose. Let's call it Blue Moose.
Yeah, Bull Moose. That was the only deviation. Right. But he did support me when I ran for re-election, as long as they didn't tell anybody. Kind of move on some of these things. And during that second term, we did have in the second, going back to that second election then, I ended up, when Don withdrew from eventually withdrew his name for the appointment to the city council with a letter saying that my youthful exuberance and over-politicalization of it would make it difficult. He would like to appeal it, and he was sure the courts would overrule me. But and it would teach a young, inexperienced lawyer like me a good lesson. This is typical language you would get from Don Elliott.
Just before you get reelected, I'm gonna have everybody get a 5-minute break, maybe they need,
Yeah, and I'll use that to kind of figure out what we want to talk about.
okay.
I'll get off of it.
You're welcome, if you have to be somewhere, now's the time to go. But I'm gonna have Marvin go ahead and talk some more, and we want you to stay in here, or you can do as you please, but we're gonna break for about 5 minutes or 10 minutes to have if you need a pit stop.